In the opulent halls of Haverford Manor, a diplomatic gala hides a deadly secret. When Ambassador Mancini collapses, poisoned by a single spoonful, suspicion falls on 4 souls: the proud chef, the burdened host, the nervous waiter, and a cunning rival diplomat. Only Miss Jane Marple, with her quiet wisdom and keen eye, can unravel the web of ambition and deceit before the truth slips away. Will she catch the killer in time? Chapter 1. The gala begins. The grand dining hall of Haverford Manor shimmered with opulence, its high ceilings adorned with crystal chandeliers that cast a kaleidoscope of light across the polished mahogany tables. The air was fragrant with the scent of damask roses arranged in towering centerpieces, and the faint clink of fine china mingled with the hum of conversation. Diplomats from half a dozen nations, their sashes and medals gleaming, moved through the room with the practiced grace of those accustomed to power. The occasion was a diplomatic gala, a prelude to delicate trade negotiations, and the tension beneath the smiles was palpable, like a taut string waiting to snap. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a velvet-upholstered chair near a tall window, observed the scene with her usual quiet attentiveness. Her invitation had come from her old-school friend, Lady Beatrice Haverford, whose husband, Sir Reginald, was hosting this glittering affair. Miss Marple, in her unassuming black lace dress, her white hair neatly pinned, seemed to blend into the damask curtains, her presence unnoticed by the swirl of dignitaries. Her knitting lay in her lap, the needles moving with a rhythmic precision that belied the sharpness of her gaze. She noted the way Sir Reginald Haverford, a tall man with a patrician air, greeted each guest with a handshake just firm enough to convey authority, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. In a corner near the kitchen doors, Monsieur Pierre Dubois, the renowned French chef, supervised his staff with a hawk-like intensity. His reputation for culinary genius had spread far beyond Paris, and tonight's menu was said to be his masterpiece. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on him, noting the nervous energy in his gestures, the way he adjusted his chef's toque as if it were a crown under siege. A young waiter, Tom Ellis, weaved through the crowd, his tray of champagne flutes held aloft with a steadiness that spoke of experience despite his boyish face. His dark eyes darted about as if seeking approval, and Miss Marple wondered what burdens lay behind his earnest demeanor. Among the guests, Herr Klaus von Straub, a diplomat from a rival nation, stood out like a shard of ice in the warm glow of the room. His angular features and stiff posture betrayed a man unaccustomed to ease, and his pale eyes flicked toward Ambassador Carlo Mancini with a frequency that Miss Marple found intriguing. Mancini, the evening's guest of honor, was a jovial Italian with a booming laugh and a reputation for brokering peace in contentious talks. Tonight, he wore his charm like a well-tailored suit, but Miss Marple noted a faint tremor in his hand as he accepted a glass of champagne, a detail that stirred her curiosity. As the guests took their seats, the first course was announced. A delicate consommé, clear as amber, served in porcelain bowls adorned with the Haverford crest. Sir Reginald stood, his voice resonant as he welcomed the assembly, his words carefully chosen to soothe the undercurrents of rivalry. Mancini rose next, raising his glass in a toast to unity and progress, his florid cheeks glowing in the candlelight. The room joined him, glasses clinking, and for a moment the tension seemed to dissolve. Miss Marple watched as Tom Ellis placed a bowl before Mancini, the steam curling upward in delicate wisps. The ambassador took a spoonful, savored it with a nod of approval, then took another. Suddenly, his face contorted. His glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. He clutched his throat, his eyes wide with panic, and collapsed with a choking gasp. Screams pierced the air as guests leapt to their feet, chairs scraping against the polished floor. Lady Beatrice's hand flew to her mouth, and Sir Reginald froze, his composure cracking like thin ice. Dr. Hargreaves, a retired physician seated nearby, pushed through the crowd and knelt beside Mancini. His fingers pressed against the ambassador's wrist, his face grim. "Poison," he said, his voice low but carrying in the sudden silence. "He's alive, but only just. We must get him to a hospital." Miss Marple's needles stilled, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the room. The glittering facade of the gala had shattered, revealing something darker beneath. She knew, with the quiet certainty of long experience, that the truth lay hidden in the small details: the tremor in a hand, the glance of an eye, the placement of a bowl. As the chaos swirled around her, she sat back, her mind already weaving the threads of suspicion into a pattern only she could see. Chapter 2. The Shadow of Suspicion. The grand dining hall of Haverford Manor, so recently a stage for elegance and diplomacy, had transformed into a tableau of shock and disarray. The crystal chandeliers still cast their radiant glow, but the light now seemed harsh, exposing the strained faces of the guests who hovered uncertainly around the table where Ambassador Carlo Mancini had collapsed. The shattered remnants of his champagne glass lay scattered across the polished floor, a glittering accusation amidst the chaos. Servants stood frozen, their trays forgotten, while diplomats murmured in hushed, urgent tones, their eyes darting toward the empty chair where Mancini had sat. The scent of roses, once enchanting, now mingled with a faint metallic tang, as if the air itself had soured with the evening's calamity. Miss Jane Marple remained in her corner, her knitting needles poised but motionless, her pale blue eyes taking in every detail with the precision of a jeweler examining a flawed gem. She noted the way Lady Beatrice Haverford, her old friend, clutched a lace handkerchief, her delicate features pale as she whispered to a footman to fetch more brandy. Sir Reginald Haverford, the host, stood near the head of the table, his broad shoulders squared but his hands clenched, betraying a tension that his urbane smile could not mask. The young waiter, Tom Ellis, hovered near the kitchen doors, his face ashen, his fingers twisting the edge of his apron. Monsieur Pierre Dubois, the chef, had emerged from his culinary sanctum, his chef's toque slightly askew, his dark eyes flashing with a mixture of indignation and fear. And Herr Klaus von Straub, the rival diplomat, stood apart, his angular frame rigid, his expression unreadable, save for a faint tightening of his jaw. The arrival of Dr. Hargreaves's pronouncement, "Poison," had sent a ripple of horror through the room, and now the word hung like a specter over the gathering. Mancini, still breathing but unconscious, had been carried to a guest room upstairs, where Dr. Hargreaves attended him, awaiting the ambulance. The guests, uncertain whether to stay or flee, milled about, their voices a low hum of speculation. Miss Marple, unnoticed by most, slipped closer to the scene, her small figure moving with the unobtrusive grace of one accustomed to being overlooked. She paused near the table, her eyes lingering on the overturned bowl of consommé, its amber contents pooling on the damask tablecloth. A single spoon lay beside it, its silver surface catching the light. She made a mental note of its position, her mind already turning over the possibilities. Sir Reginald, recovering his composure, raised his hands for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice steady but strained, "this is a most unfortunate incident, but I assure you we will get to the bottom of it. The police have been summoned, and I ask for your cooperation until they arrive." His words were met with uneasy nods, though Miss Marple noted the skeptical glances exchanged among the diplomats. A poisoned ambassador was no mere accident. It was a scandal that could unravel the fragile negotiations for which they had gathered. Inspector George Crane arrived within the hour, a burly man with a ruddy complexion and a manner that suggested he preferred action to deliberation. His uniform was slightly rumpled, as if he had been called from a late supper, and his small, sharp eyes scanned the room with a mixture of suspicion and impatience. He was accompanied by a young constable who carried a notebook and looked faintly overwhelmed by the grandeur of Haverford Manor. Inspector Crane wasted no time, striding to the center of the room and addressing the guests with a voice that carried the authority of a man used to being obeyed. "This is a serious matter," he began, his tone clipped. "An attempt on Ambassador Mancini's life has been made, and I intend to find the culprit. No one is to leave this house until I have spoken with each of you. Is that understood?" There were murmurs of assent, though Miss Marple caught the fleeting look of dismay on Herr von Straub's face, quickly masked by his usual icy composure. She filed the observation away, her knitting needles resuming their soft clicking as she listened. Inspector Crane's first act was to secure the dining hall, ordering the constable to guard the doors and prevent anyone from tampering with the scene. He then turned his attention to the four individuals who, by virtue of their roles, had fallen under immediate suspicion. Sir Reginald, as the host who had orchestrated the evening, Monsieur Dubois, whose kitchen had produced the fatal dish, Tom Ellis, who had served it, and Herr von Straub, whose rivalry with Mancini was whispered about even among the guests. Miss Marple, seated now on a cushioned bench near the fireplace, watched as Crane began his interrogations, his questions blunt and his patience thin. Sir Reginald was the first to be questioned, his interview conducted in a small anteroom off the dining hall. Miss Marple, invited by Lady Beatrice to keep her company during the ordeal, sat quietly in the corner, her knitting a soothing rhythm against the inspector's brusque tone. "Sir Reginald," Crane began, "you were responsible for this gala. Did you have any reason to wish harm to Ambassador Mancini?" Sir Reginald's face stiffened, his aristocratic features drawn tight. "Absolutely not," he replied, his voice low but firm. "Mancini was a friend and a key figure in the negotiations. His collapse is a disaster for me, both personally and politically." He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "I was with the French delegate, Monsieur Lefebvre, throughout the evening. He can confirm I was nowhere near the kitchen or the serving area." Crane's eyes narrowed. "And the seating arrangements? Who decided where Mancini would sit?" Sir Reginald hesitated, just for a moment, and Miss Marple's needles paused. "I did," he admitted. "But it was a last-minute change. Herr von Straub requested to be seated beside Mancini, something about diplomatic protocol. I saw no reason to refuse." Miss Marple's lips twitched in a faint smile. A small detail, but a significant one. She made a mental note to inquire further about von Straub's request, her mind already piecing together the puzzle. Next came Monsieur Dubois, who stormed into the anteroom with the air of a man insulted beyond endurance. "Poison in my consommé, c'est ridicule," he exclaimed, his French accent thickening with agitation. "I have cooked for kings, for presidents. My kitchen is a temple, and I taste every dish myself. If there was poison, I would be the one in the hospital." His hands gesticulated wildly, and Miss Marple noted the faint sheen of sweat on his brow, despite the coolness of the room. Crane, unimpressed, leaned back in his chair. "Then explain how the poison got into the ambassador's bowl, Monsieur Dubois. You prepared the dish, did you not?" "Of course I did," Dubois snapped. "But once it leaves my kitchen, I cannot control what happens. The bowls were placed on the sideboard for the waiters to collect. Anyone could have tampered with them." His voice rose, and Miss Marple observed the way his eyes darted toward the door, as if expecting rescue. She wondered if his indignation was genuine or a carefully crafted performance. Inspector Crane pressed further, asking about the ingredients, the preparation, the staff. Dubois answered with a mix of pride and exasperation, describing his meticulous process: the fresh herbs, the clarified broth, the hours spent perfecting the consommé. Miss Marple listened intently, her mind snagging on a single detail. A small vial of olive oil Dubois mentioned using for finishing touches. She recalled seeing it in the kitchen, its handwritten label catching her eye. "Imported from Provence," Dubois had said, but his voice had faltered, just slightly. She resolved to examine it later, her instincts whispering that it held more significance than the chef let on. Tom Ellis was next, and the young waiter entered the anteroom with the air of a schoolboy summoned to the headmaster's office. His hands trembled as he stood before Crane, his dark eyes wide with fear. "I didn't do anything, sir," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just served the soup, like I was told. I didn't even know which bowl went to the ambassador." Crane's gaze was unrelenting. "You carried the bowl to his table, lad. Did you see anyone near it? Anyone acting suspicious?" Tom shook his head, his fingers twisting the hem of his jacket. "No, sir. It was all so quick. The bowls were on the sideboard, and I just picked them up. There were people everywhere, guests, other waiters. I didn't see anything odd." His voice cracked, and Miss Marple's heart softened for the boy. She noted his calloused hands, the faint smudge of exhaustion under his eyes. He was young, perhaps no more than 20, and the weight of suspicion seemed to crush him. Gently, Miss Marple spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Tell me, Tom, how long were the bowls on the sideboard before you took them?" Tom blinked, startled by her presence. "Not long, ma'am. Maybe a minute or two. The kitchen was busy, and we were told to serve quickly." He hesitated, then added, "They were out of sight for a bit, though. Behind a screen where the waiters collect the trays." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking softly. "A minute or two, behind a screen. Time enough for a practiced hand to act." She patted Tom's arm, her smile reassuring, but her mind was already racing, picturing the layout of the dining hall and the fleeting moments of opportunity. Herr von Straub was the last to be questioned, and he entered the anteroom with the cold precision of a man accustomed to scrutiny. His pale eyes met Crane's without flinching, and his voice was smooth, almost too smooth. "I had no quarrel with Mancini," he said, his German accent clipped. "Our countries have differences, yes, but poison? That is the stuff of melodrama, not diplomacy." Crane leaned forward, his tone sharp. "You were seated beside him, Herr von Straub. You had opportunity, and I'm told you and Mancini were rivals in these negotiations." Von Straub's lips curled in a faint, dismissive smile. "Rivals? Perhaps, but I am a diplomat, not a murderer. I was engaged in conversation with Lady Beatrice when the ambassador collapsed. She can confirm it." His gaze flicked briefly to Miss Marple, as if assessing her, and she met it with a bland, unassuming smile. She had seen that smile before, on men who believed themselves untouchable, and it only sharpened her curiosity. Miss Marple recalled an earlier moment before the gala began, when she had overheard von Straub speaking to a colleague in the corridor. "Mancini blocks our every move," he had said, his voice low and bitter. "If he persists, we lose everything." The words had been fleeting, but they lingered in her memory, a thread in the tapestry she was weaving. As the interviews concluded, Inspector Crane dismissed the suspects with a warning to remain available. The guests, now released from the dining hall, dispersed to the drawing rooms and parlors, their whispers growing louder as speculation took root. Miss Marple returned to her seat by the fireplace, her knitting resuming its steady rhythm. Lady Beatrice joined her, her face drawn with worry. "Oh, Jane," she murmured, "what a dreadful night! Who could have done such a thing?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly, though her expression remained serene. "People are not so different, Beatrice, whether in a village or a manor. They act for reasons, greed, fear, ambition. We need only find the reason, and the person will follow." She thought of the 4 suspects: Sir Reginald, whose reputation hung in the balance; Dubois, whose pride masked a nervous edge; Tom, whose desperation made him vulnerable; and von Straub, whose ambition burned like a cold flame. Each had opportunity, each had a motive, however veiled. And then there was the vial of olive oil, its label an anomaly in the pristine kitchen. Miss Marple's needles clicked, her mind sifting through the details, searching for the one thread that would unravel the mystery. As the clock struck midnight, the ambulance arrived, its siren a mournful wail in the night. Mancini was taken to the hospital, his fate uncertain. Inspector Crane, satisfied with his initial inquiries, prepared to leave, but not before issuing a stern warning to the household. "Someone in this room knows more than they're saying. I'll be back tomorrow, and I expect answers." Miss Marple watched him go, her thoughts far from the chaos around her. She knew the truth lay not in grand gestures, but in the small, overlooked details: the placement of a bowl, the flicker of an eye, the contents of a vial. The shadow of suspicion had fallen over Haverford Manor, and she intended to step into its darkness, her quiet resolve as sharp as the needles in her hands. Chapter 3. The Chef's Defense. The morning after the gala dawned gray and heavy, the sky over Haverford Manor cloaked in clouds that seemed to mirror the unease within its walls. The grand dining hall, so vibrant the night before, now stood silent, its tables cleared of their finery, though the faint scent of roses lingered, mingling with the acrid memory of panic. Miss Jane Marple, having spent a restful night in one of the manor's guest rooms at Lady Beatrice's insistence, rose early, her mind as alert as ever. She sat by a window in the morning room, her knitting needles moving with their familiar rhythm, while her eyes traced the patterns of the previous evening's events, each detail a stitch in the fabric of her thoughts. The household was subdued, the servants moving with hushed steps, their glances wary. News had come from the hospital that Ambassador Mancini remained in critical condition, his survival uncertain. Inspector Crane had left a constable to guard the dining hall and kitchen, and the air buzzed with the unspoken question of who among them had dared to poison a man so publicly. Miss Marple, invited by Lady Beatrice to have a look about and offer her quiet wisdom, found herself drawn to the kitchen, where the first threads of the mystery had begun to unravel. Monsieur Pierre Dubois, the celebrated chef, was already at work, despite the shadow of suspicion hanging over him. The kitchen, a vast space of gleaming copper pots and white-tiled walls, was his domain, and he presided over it with the fervor of a general on a battlefield. His chef's toque was perched at a defiant angle, but his eyes, dark and restless, betrayed a man under strain. When Miss Marple entered, accompanied by Lady Beatrice, he was barking orders at a nervous sous chef, his French accent sharp as he gestured to a tray of pastries. "Non, non, the dough must rest, imbecile," he snapped, then caught sight of his visitors and softened his demeanor, though only slightly. "Lady Beatrice, mademoiselle," he said, bowing with a flourish that did not quite mask his agitation. "You come to see my kitchen, oui? It is a place of art, not crime." His voice rose, and Miss Marple noted the way his hands clenched, the knuckles whitening against the edge of a counter. Lady Beatrice, ever the gracious hostess, smiled weakly. "Oh, Pierre, no one doubts your skill, but Jane, Miss Marple, thought it might help to see where the consommé was prepared. To clear things up, you understand." Dubois's eyes narrowed, but he nodded, gesturing expansively. "Clear things up? Bien sûr. Come, see for yourself. My kitchen is spotless, my methods impeccable. Poison? Bah, an insult to my craft." He led them through the kitchen, pointing out the orderly rows of ingredients, jars of herbs, bottles of oils, a basket of fresh vegetables, all meticulously labeled. Miss Marple's gaze swept over the scene, her expression one of polite interest, though her mind was cataloging every detail with precision. She paused by a high shelf near the stove, where a small vial of olive oil caught her attention. Its label, handwritten in a spidery script, stood out among the neatly printed jars. "This is unusual," she remarked, her voice mild. "Imported, I presume?" Dubois's face tightened, just for a moment, before he recovered his bravado. "From Provence, mademoiselle. A special blend, for finishing touches. I use it sparingly, for flavor." His tone was dismissive, but Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in his hand as he waved it away. She made no further comment, but her eyes lingered on the vial, its contents shimmering faintly in the morning light. Inspector Crane arrived shortly after, his heavy footsteps echoing through the kitchen. He was in no mood for pleasantries, his ruddy face set in a scowl as he confronted Dubois. "Monsieur Dubois," he began, his voice like gravel, "the poison was in the consommé. You prepared it. Care to explain how it got there?" Dubois threw up his hands, his indignation flaring anew. "Explain? I explain nothing. I tasted the consommé myself, as I always do. A chef does not serve what he does not trust. If there was poison, it was not from my hands." His voice echoed off the tiled walls, and the sous chef flinched, retreating to a corner. Miss Marple watched, her needles clicking softly, noting the chef's theatrical outrage and wondering how much of it was genuine. Crane, unimpressed, stepped closer. "Tasted it, did you? And yet the ambassador collapsed after one spoonful. Convenient that you're still standing, isn't it?" Dubois's face reddened, his mustache quivering. "You accuse me? Me, Pierre Dubois, who has cooked for the elite of Europe? I would sooner poison myself than taint my art." He gestured to the kitchen, his arms wide. "Search it then, every jar, every pot. You will find nothing but perfection." Crane, undeterred, ordered the constable to begin a thorough search, though Miss Marple suspected the inspector's methods were too blunt to uncover the subtler truths. She stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Monsieur Dubois, if I may, how many people had access to the kitchen last night?" Dubois blinked, caught off guard by her soft tone. "The kitchen? Only my staff, 2 sous-chefs, a dishwasher, and myself. The waiters, they come to the sideboard, but they do not enter." He hesitated, then added, "The sideboard, it is just outside, in the passage." The bowls were there, waiting to be served. Miss Marple nodded, her mind picturing the narrow passage between the kitchen and dining hall, a shadowed space where trays were set before being carried to the tables. And was anyone else near the sideboard? A guest, perhaps, or someone unexpected? Dubois frowned, his brow furrowing as he thought. "No, I saw no one. But I was busy, you understand. The gala, it was chaos. Guests everywhere, waiters running." His voice trailed off, and Miss Marple sensed a flicker of doubt in his eyes, as if he were replaying the evening in his mind. Crane, growing impatient, cut in. "Enough of this. Your kitchen, your dish, your responsibility. I'm detaining you for further questioning, Dubois. Don't leave the manor." He turned to the constable, barking orders to seal the kitchen and catalogue every item. Dubois's shoulders slumped, his bravado deflating, though his eyes still burned with defiance. Lady Beatrice, distressed, touched Miss Marple's arm. "Jane, surely Pierre couldn't have done this. He's been with us for years, and his cooking is his life." Miss Marple patted her friend's hand, her smile reassuring but non-committal. "People are complex, Beatrice. Even the most passionate have their secrets." She glanced back at the kitchen, her thoughts returning to the vial of olive oil. Its label, so unlike the others, nagged at her, a small discord in the chef's otherwise meticulous world. She resolved to examine it further, but discreetly, knowing that Inspector Crane's heavy-handed approach would likely miss such subtleties. As they left the kitchen, Miss Marple paused in the passage where the sideboard stood, a sturdy oak table, now bare save for a single candelabrum. She pictured the scene from the previous night, the bustle of waiters, the clatter of trays, the momentary lapse when the bowls sat unattended. It was a fleeting window, but enough for a careful hand to act. She thought of Tom Ellis, his nervous demeanor, and Herr von Straub, whose cold ambition had not escaped her notice. And then there was Sir Reginald, whose last-minute seating change had placed Mancini beside his rival. Each thread led to another, and Miss Marple's mind wove them together, searching for the pattern that would reveal the truth. Back in the morning room, Lady Beatrice sank into a chair, her face pale. "Jane, this is dreadful. The negotiations, the scandal. It could ruin Reginald. And poor Mancini, still fighting for his life. What do we do?" Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, a soothing counterpoint to the tension in the room. "We observe, my dear," she said softly. "People betray themselves in the smallest ways, a word, a glance, a moment of hesitation. The truth is there, if we look closely." She thought of Dubois' defensiveness, his insistence on tasting the dish, and the vial that seemed out of place. She thought, too, of the other suspects, each with their own burdens and motives. The chef's pride was a shield, but was it hiding guilt or fear? Miss Marple knew that the answer lay not in grand accusations, but in the quiet accumulation of facts, and she intended to gather them, one stitch at a time. As the morning wore on, the manor buzzed with whispered speculations, the guests confined to its walls by Inspector Crane's orders. Miss Marple, unnoticed by most, slipped into the background, her presence as unassuming as ever. But her eyes were sharp, her mind alert, and the shadow of suspicion, though broad, was beginning to take shape under her careful scrutiny. Chapter 4. The Host's Burden. The late morning light filtered through the heavy drapes of Haverford Manor's study, casting long shadows across the oak-paneled walls. The room, with its towering bookshelves and leather-bound volumes, exuded an air of quiet authority, much like its occupant, Sir Reginald Haverford. Yet today, the study felt stifling, the weight of the previous night's events pressing down like the low clouds outside. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, her knitting a soft presence in her lap, observed Sir Reginald with her usual unobtrusive clarity. He had invited her here under the pretense of tea, but she knew it was no mere courtesy. The man was burdened, and she was determined to understand why. Sir Reginald stood by the window, his broad frame silhouetted against the gray sky. His hands were clasped behind his back, the knuckles tight, and his face, usually so composed, bore the faint lines of sleeplessness. "Miss Marple," he began, turning to her with a smile that faltered at the edges. "Beatrice speaks so highly of your insight. I thought you might offer a perspective on this dreadful business." He gestured to a silver tray where a teapot steamed gently, but his eyes were restless, searching her face for something, reassurance, perhaps, or absolution. Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression serene. "You're very kind, Sir Reginald. I'm only a visitor, of course, but I find that listening carefully often reveals more than one expects." Her needles clicked softly, a rhythmic counterpoint to the tension in the room. She noted the way he paced, stopping to adjust a framed photograph on the desk. A family portrait, she presumed, though his gaze lingered on it with a trace of unease. He poured the tea, his movements deliberate, and handed her a delicate porcelain cup. "This affair with Mancini," he said, settling into a chair opposite her. "It's a catastrophe. He's been a friend for years, you know. His work on the trade negotiations was vital, not just for me, but for the entire region." His voice was steady, but Miss Marple caught the faint tremor beneath it, the strain of a man carrying more than he admitted. She sipped her tea, her eyes never leaving his. "It must be terribly difficult," she said gently, "to have such an incident occur under your roof, with so much at stake. Tell me, Sir Reginald, how did you come to know the ambassador?" He leaned back, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "We met in Brussels nearly a decade ago. Carlo was always a charmer, but sharp as a tack. He had a knack for bringing people together, even when the odds were against it. These negotiations, he was the linchpin. Without him, I fear the whole thing could collapse." He paused, his gaze distant. "And now, with this accusation of poison, the scandal could ruin everything I've worked for." Miss Marple nodded, her needles pausing as she considered his words. "A scandal, indeed, and yet it seems so deliberate, doesn't it? Poison is not a casual weapon. Whoever chose it had a purpose." She watched him closely, noting the way his jaw tightened, the brief flicker of something, guilt, perhaps, or fear, in his eyes. He stood abruptly, crossing to the window again. "I had no reason to harm Carlo," he said, his voice low but firm. "None. My reputation, my position, it all depends on these talks succeeding. If anything, I needed him alive." He turned to face her, his expression earnest. "I was with Monsieur Lefebvre, the French delegate, all evening. We were discussing tariffs, of all things. He'll vouch for me." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, almost maternal. "Of course. But tell me, Sir Reginald, the seating arrangements, such a small detail, yet so important. You said last night that you changed them at the last moment. Why was that?" He hesitated, his fingers brushing the edge of the desk. "It was Herr von Straub," he admitted. "He approached me just before the gala began, insisting it was protocol for him to sit beside Mancini. Something about fostering dialogue, he said. I thought it a reasonable request, given the tensions between their countries. Perhaps—" His voice trailed off, and he shook his head. Perhaps it was a mistake. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her mind turning over this new piece of the puzzle. A last-minute change, at von Straub's behest. It was a small thread, but one that could lead to the heart of the matter. She thought of the rival diplomat's cold demeanor, his sharp glances toward Mancini during the gala. Ambition, she knew, could drive men to desperate acts, and von Straub's ambition was no secret. "You mustn't blame yourself," she said softly. "People reveal their intentions in curious ways. A request like that, it might mean nothing or everything." She paused, then added, "Did you notice anything unusual about Herr von Straub that evening? Anything out of the ordinary?" Sir Reginald frowned, his brow furrowing as he thought. He was intense, as always, kept to himself, mostly, though he spoke with Beatrice for a time. He had a small pouch with him, diplomatic, he said, for papers. He was quite particular about it, kept it close. He shrugged as if dismissing the detail, but Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her expression remained bland. "Oh, pouch," she murmured, almost to herself. "How interesting." She made a mental note, her thoughts returning to the vial of olive oil in the kitchen, its handwritten label so out of place. Could there be a connection? She filed the thought away, knowing that speculation without evidence was like knitting without yarn. Pretty, but useless. The conversation turned to lighter matters, Sir Reginald clearly eager to shift the focus. He spoke of the manor's history, of his hopes for the negotiations, but Miss Marple listened with only half her attention. Her mind was elsewhere, piecing together the fragments of the evening, the consommé, the sideboard, the seating change, the pouch. Sir Reginald's burden was clear, his reputation, his legacy, all hung in the balance. But was it the burden of guilt, or merely the weight of circumstance? She suspected the latter, but her instincts told her to look closer. As they finished their tea, Lady Beatrice entered, her face pale but composed. "Jane, Inspector Crane is back," she said, her voice tight. "He's in the drawing room, asking for you. He says it's about the kitchen." She glanced at her husband, her eyes filled with unspoken worry. Sir Reginald stood, his expression grim. "I'll come with you. This nonsense with Dubois needs sorting out." He offered Miss Marple his arm, but she declined with a gentle smile, preferring to walk unaided. Her small figure moved with quiet determination, her mind already racing ahead to the next thread in the tapestry. In the drawing room, Inspector Crane stood by the fireplace, his ruddy face set in a scowl. The constable, notebook in hand, hovered nearby, looking as if he wished to be anywhere else. "Miss Marple," Crane said, his tone grudging. "Lady Beatrice says you've a knack for noticing things. I don't usually entertain amateurs, but I'll hear you out. What did you make of that chef?" Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting resting in her lap. "Monsieur Dubois is a proud man," she said, her voice mild. "His kitchen is his world, and the accusation wounds him deeply, but pride can hide many things. Fear, perhaps, or something else. I wonder, Inspector, have you examined the vial of olive oil on the kitchen shelf?" Crane's eyes narrowed. "Olive oil? What's that got to do with anything?" "Perhaps nothing," she replied, her smile serene. "But it struck me as unusual. The label, you see, was handwritten, unlike the others. It might be worth a closer look." Crane grunted, clearly skeptical, but jotted a note. "I'll have it checked, but mark my words, that chef's hiding something. His story's too neat." He turned to Sir Reginald, his tone sharp. "And you, sir, don't think you're in the clear. Hosting a gala doesn't make you innocent." Sir Reginald stiffened, but Miss Marple spoke before he could retort. "Inspector, I'm sure Sir Reginald is as eager as you are to find the truth. After all, this is his home, his reputation." Her words were gentle, but they carried a quiet authority, and Crane, for all his bluster, nodded grudgingly. As they left the drawing-room, Miss Marple's thoughts returned to Sir Reginald's words, the seating change, the pouch, the burden he carried. She thought, too, of the other suspects. Dubois' defensive pride, Tom's nervous desperation, von Straub's calculated calm. Each had a role in the evening's drama, and each, she suspected, held a piece of the truth. Her needles clicked softly, a steady rhythm against the chaos, as she resolved to unravel the next thread in the mystery of the poisoned gala dinner. Chapter 5. The Waiter's Tale. The afternoon light cast a pallor over Haverford Manor, the gray clouds outside refusing to yield to sunshine. The drawing-room, where Miss Jane Marple now sat, was a haven of quiet elegance, its walls adorned with pastoral paintings and its armchairs upholstered in deep green velvet. Yet the air was thick with unease, the events of the previous evening lingering like an unwelcome guest. Miss Marple, her knitting needles moving with their familiar, soothing rhythm, had positioned herself near a bay window, where she could observe both the room and the gravel drive beyond. Her presence, as ever, was unobtrusive, her small figure blending into the surroundings, though her pale blue eyes missed nothing. Inspector Crane had taken over the library for his interrogations, and the household buzzed with the comings and goings of servants and guests, all confined to the manor by his decree. Miss Marple had been permitted to linger nearby, thanks to Lady Beatrice's insistence that her friend's quiet wisdom might prove useful. The inspector, though skeptical of amateurs, had grudgingly allowed her presence, perhaps sensing that her unassuming demeanor belied a mind as sharp as any detective's. The focus now turned to Tom Ellis, the young waiter who had served the poisoned consommé to Ambassador Mancini. Miss Marple had watched him throughout the morning, noting his nervous energy as he moved through the manor, his dark eyes darting as if expecting accusation at every turn. He was barely 20, with a boyish face and calloused hands that spoke of hard work beyond the polished confines of Haverford Manor. When summoned to the library, he entered with the air of a man walking to his doom, his shoulders hunched and his fingers twisting the edge of his worn jacket. Inspector Crane sat at a heavy oak desk, his ruddy face set in a scowl, his notebook open before him. The constable stood by the door, pencil poised, looking faintly uncomfortable in the grandeur of the room. "Tom Ellis," Crane began, his voice a low growl. "You served the soup to Ambassador Mancini. It was poisoned. Start talking." Tom's face paled, his eyes wide with panic. "I didn't do anything, sir," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I swear it. I just carried the bowl, like I was told. I didn't even know it was for the ambassador until I set it down." His hands trembled, and he clasped them together, as if to steady himself. Crane leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You expect me to believe that? You were the last to touch that bowl before it reached Mancini. If there's poison in it, lad, you're the one who put it there, or you know who did." Tom shook his head vehemently, his voice cracking. "No, sir, I'd never. My job. It's everything to me. My mum, she's sick, and the wages here keep her in medicine. I wouldn't risk it, not for anything." His desperation was palpable, and Miss Marple, seated quietly in a corner with her knitting, felt a pang of sympathy for the boy. She noted the faint smudge of exhaustion beneath his eyes, the way his shoulders seemed to carry a weight far heavier than his years. She spoke softly, her voice cutting through the tension like a gentle breeze. "Tom, dear, perhaps you could tell us how the serving worked. The bowls, where did you collect them from?" Her tone was kind, almost grandmotherly, and Tom turned to her, his expression a mix of relief and confusion. Crane shot her a glance, but did not interrupt, and Tom swallowed hard before answering. "From the sideboard, ma'am, in the passage just outside the kitchen. The chefs put the bowls there, all lined up, and us waiters, we take them to the tables. It's how it's always done for big dinners like this." He hesitated, then added, "I picked up the bowl, same as the others. I didn't notice anything different about it." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking rhythmically. "And how long were the bowls on the sideboard before you took them? Were they left alone at any point?" Tom frowned, his brow furrowing as he thought. "Not long, ma'am. A minute, maybe two. The kitchen was busy, and we were told to move quick. But—" He paused, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. "There's a screen in the passage to keep the guests from seeing the trays. The bowls were behind it, out of sight for a bit. I suppose someone could have got to them then." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her smile remained serene. A screen shielding the sideboard from view. A brief moment of opportunity, unnoticed in the chaos of the gala. She pictured the narrow passage, the bustle of waiters, the distraction of the toast as Mancini raised his glass. It was precisely the sort of fleeting window a clever hand might exploit. "And did you see anyone near the sideboard?" she asked gently. "Someone who shouldn't have been there, perhaps." Tom shook his head, but his hesitation was telling. "I don't know, ma'am. There were so many people, guests, other waiters, even some of the diplomats wandering about before the dinner started. I wasn't looking for anything strange." His voice trembled, and he looked down at his hands, as if ashamed of his own uncertainty. Crane snorted, his patience wearing thin. "You're not helping yourself, lad. If you didn't see anything, then you're either lying or careless, and neither looks good for you." He jotted something in his notebook, his pencil scratching loudly in the quiet room. Miss Marple interceded, her voice calm but firm. "Inspector, if I may, Tom is a young man in a difficult position. He's told us what he knows, and it's given us something to consider. The sideboard, the screen, the moment of distraction. These are the small things that matter. She turned to Tom, her smile reassuring. You've been very helpful, dear. Try not to worry his worry. Tom nodded, his face flushed with gratitude, and mumbled a thank you before hurrying from the room. Crane watched him go, then turned to Miss Marple, his expression grudging. You've got a soft spot for the boy, haven't you? Well, don't let it cloud your judgment. He's still a suspect. Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression unruffled. I only wish to understand, Inspector. The truth is often found in the details, not the accusations. She resumed her knitting, her mind already turning over Tom's words. The sideboard, out of sight behind a screen. A minute or two, unattended. It was a slender thread, but one that could lead to the truth. As she left the library, Lady Beatrice approached, her face drawn with worry. Jane, have you learned anything? Reginald is beside himself, and the guests are growing restless. Miss Marple patted her friend's hand. Patience, Beatrice. These things take time. Young Tom has given us a piece of the puzzle, though he doesn't incorporate it. He's frightened, poor boy, but honest, I think. We must look to the others now. Beatrice nodded, though her eyes were anxious. And Pierre? He's in a state, swearing he'll never cook again if they don't clear his name soon. Miss Marple's lips twitched faintly. Monsieur Dubois's pride is wounded, but his heart may yet be true. I shall visit him again, and perhaps learn more. She glanced toward the door, her thoughts returning to the vial of olive oil, the sideboard, and the fleeting moment when poison might have found its way into Mancini's bowl. Tom Ellis, she suspected, was no poisoner, but he had been the unwitting instrument of someone else's scheme. The question was whose? As they walked back to the drawing room, Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her mind weaving together the threads of the mystery. Tom's tale, though simple, had illuminated a critical moment, and she felt the pattern of the truth beginning to emerge, stitch by careful stitch. Chapter 6. The Rival's Ambition. The late afternoon cast a somber glow over Haverford Manor, the gray clouds outside thickening as if to mirror the mounting tension within. The drawing-room, where Miss Jane Marple now sat, was a haven of muted elegance, its heavy curtains drawn back to admit the fading light. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room, but it did little to warm the chill of suspicion that hung in the air. Miss Marple, her knitting needles moving with their steady, comforting rhythm, had settled into a high-backed chair near a side table, her position allowing her to observe the comings and goings of the manor's occupants. Her presence, as always, was unobtrusive, her small figure blending into the surroundings, though her pale blue eyes were as sharp as ever, catching every nuance of expression and gesture. Inspector Crane had continued his interrogations, his brusque manner leaving a trail of rattled nerves among the guests and staff. The manor, though grand, felt increasingly like a gilded cage, with no one permitted to leave until the mystery of Ambassador Mancini's poisoning was resolved. Miss Marple, permitted to linger near the proceedings at Lady Beatrice's behest, had listened carefully to each interview, her mind sifting through the details like a seamstress sorting threads. The young waiter, Tom Ellis, had provided a crucial piece of the puzzle with his account of the sideboard, and Sir Reginald's revelation about the seating arrangements had sharpened her focus on Herr Klaus von Straub, the rival diplomat, whose cold demeanor had marked him as a figure of interest from the start. Now, as the clock struck 4, von Straub was summoned to the library, where Inspector Crane awaited. Miss Marple, invited by Lady Beatrice to keep an eye on things, followed quietly, her knitting tucked under her arm. The library, with its towering shelves and scent of old leather, was a fitting stage for the confrontation, its somber atmosphere underscoring the gravity of the moment. Von Straub entered with the precision of a man accustomed to command, his tall, angular frame clad in a tailored suit that seemed to accentuate his austerity. His pale eyes, sharp and unyielding, met Crane's without a flicker of unease, and his thin lips curved in a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Herr von Straub," Crane began, his voice a low growl, "you were seated beside Ambassador Mancini last night. You had opportunity to tamper with his food, and I'm told your countries are at odds over these trade negotiations. Care to explain why I shouldn't consider you the prime suspect?" Von Straub's expression remained impassive, his hands folded neatly before him. "Inspector," he said, his German accent clipped and precise, "your accusation is as absurd as it is offensive. I had no quarrel with Mancini beyond the usual diplomatic disagreements. Poison is the weapon of cowards, not diplomats. I assure you, I had no part in this." His voice was smooth, almost too smooth, and Miss Marple, seated in a corner with her knitting, noted the calculated calm of his delivery. It was the voice of a man who had prepared for scrutiny, and she wondered what lay beneath it. Crane leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "No quarrel? That's not what I hear. Word is, Mancini's push for a unified trade agreement was blocking your country's interests. You had every reason to want him out of the way." Von Straub's smile tightened, though his composure held. "You oversimplify, Inspector. Diplomacy is a game of compromise, not violence. Mancini and I disagreed, yes, but I was engaged in conversation with Lady Beatrice when he collapsed. She can confirm I did not touch his food or drink." He leaned back, his posture relaxed, but his eyes alert, as if daring Crane to press further. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her mind returning to an earlier moment she had overheard before the gala. In the corridor outside the dining hall, von Straub had spoken to a colleague, his voice low and laced with frustration. "Mancini blocks our every move," he had said. "If he persists, our plans are ruined." The words had been fleeting, but they had struck her as significant, a glimpse into a mind driven by ambition. She recalled, too, Sir Reginald's mention of von Straub's diplomatic pouch, kept close throughout the evening. It was a small detail, but one that nagged at her, like a loose stitch in a carefully woven pattern. She spoke now, her voice gentle but clear. "Herr von Straub, if I may ask, you requested to sit beside Ambassador Mancini, did you not? A matter of protocol, I believe Sir Reginald said. Was there a particular reason for that?" Von Straub turned to her, his pale eyes assessing her with a flicker of surprise, as if he had not expected the question from such an unassuming figure. "Miss Marple, is it?" he said, his tone courteous but guarded. "Indeed, I suggested the arrangement. It is customary in diplomatic circles to seat key negotiators together, to foster dialogue. I thought it might ease tensions." His smile was polite, but Miss Marple noted the slight tightening of his jaw, the barest hint of discomfort. "And did it?" she asked, her eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. "Ease tensions, I mean?" Von Straub hesitated just for a moment before replying. Mancini was resistant to compromise, as always, but our conversation was civil, nothing more. His voice was steady, but Miss Marple sensed a carefully constructed facade, one that concealed more than it revealed. Crane, growing impatient, cut in. "Enough about seating arrangements. What about this pouch of yours? Sir Reginald says you were particular about it. What was in it?" Von Straub's expression hardened, though his smile remained. "Papers, Inspector. Diplomatic correspondence, confidential in nature. Surely you understand the need for discretion in my line of work." He spread his hands as if to dismiss the question, but Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind turning over the possibility that the pouch held something more than papers. She thought of the vial of olive oil in the kitchen, its handwritten label so unlike the others. Could von Straub have brought something with him? Something small, easily concealed, that could be slipped into a bowl of consommé during a moment of distraction. The idea was speculative, but Miss Marple knew that the truth often lay in the smallest details, the ones others overlooked. She made a mental note to inquire further about the pouch, perhaps through Lady Beatrice, who had spent time with von Straub during the gala. Crane, unsatisfied with von Straub's answers, pressed further. "You're a cool one, aren't you? But I've seen your type before. Ambitious, calculating. If Mancini was in your way, poison would be a tidy solution, wouldn't it?" Von Straub's eyes flashed, though his voice remained calm. "You overreach, Inspector. I am a diplomat, not a criminal. If you have evidence, present it. Otherwise, I suggest you focus on those with actual access to the food, say, the chef or that nervous waiter." His tone was dismissive, and Miss Marple noted the way he deflected suspicion, his words sharp but controlled. Crane grunted, jotting a note in his book. "Don't think you're off the hook, Herr von Straub. I'll be watching you." He dismissed the diplomat with a wave, and von Straub left the room with the same measured stride, his composure intact, but his eyes betraying a flicker of unease. As the door closed, Miss Marple turned to Crane, her voice soft but deliberate. "Inspector, might I suggest looking into that pouch? It may be nothing, of course, but in my experience, people are particular about things for a reason." Crane snorted, though his expression softened slightly. "You and your details, Miss Marple. I'll have a word with Lady Beatrice about it, but I'm betting on the chef. He's got the means, and that temper of his doesn't help his case." He stood, signaling the end of the session, but Miss Marple lingered, her mind already weaving the new threads into her tapestry. She returned to the drawing room, where Lady Beatrice awaited, her face a mask of anxiety. "Jane, what do you make of Herr von Straub?" she asked, her voice low. "He's so cold. Do you think he could have done it?" Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her smile serene. "He's a man with ambition, Beatrice, and ambition can lead to dangerous choices. But we mustn't jump to conclusions. The truth will show itself in time." She thought of von Straub's calculated calm, his insistence on sitting beside Mancini, the pouch he guarded so closely. And she thought, too, of the other suspects, Dubois's defensive pride, Tom's nervous honesty, Sir Reginald's burdened demeanor. Each held a piece of the puzzle, and Miss Marple knew that the key lay in finding the connection between them, the thread that would unravel the mystery of the poisoned gala dinner. Chapter 7. A clue in the kitchen. The evening shadows deepened over Haverford Manor, the gray clouds giving way to a drizzle that pattered against the tall windows. The grand house, though still imposing, seemed to shrink under the weight of suspicion, its corridors hushed and its occupants restless. Miss Jane Marple, having spent the afternoon observing the comings and goings of Inspector Crane's investigation, felt the threads of the mystery tightening, each new detail a stitch in the intricate pattern she was weaving. She had returned to the drawing room, her knitting needles moving with their steady rhythm, when Lady Beatrice approached, her face etched with worry. "Jane, I can't bear this tension," Beatrice murmured, sinking into a chair beside her friend. "The guests are whispering, the servants are on edge, and poor Reginald is beside himself. Have you learned anything more?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly, though her expression remained serene. "A little, my dear, but I should like to see the kitchen again, if you'll permit it. There's something there, I think, that may help us." Beatrice nodded eagerly, grateful for any action that might dispel the gloom. "Of course, Jane. I'll come with you. The constable is still there, but he won't mind, surely." She led the way, her silk skirts rustling softly, and Miss Marple followed, her small figure unobtrusive but purposeful, her knitting tucked under her arm. The kitchen, though no longer bustling with the frenetic energy of the gala, retained its air of meticulous order. The copper pots gleamed, the tiled counters were spotless, and the shelves were lined with jars and bottles, each labeled with precision, save for one. Miss Marple's gaze went immediately to the vial of olive oil she had noticed earlier, its handwritten label a stark contrast to the printed ones around it. The constable, a young man with a nervous air, stood guard near the door, his eyes darting between the women and the kitchen's contents. "May we look about?" Miss Marple asked, her voice gentle but firm. The constable hesitated, then nodded, clearly unsure of how to refuse the request of Lady Beatrice's guest. "Just don't touch anything, ma'am," he said, his tone apologetic. "Inspector's orders." "Of course," Miss Marple replied, her smile disarming. She moved slowly through the kitchen, her eyes scanning every detail, the knives neatly arrayed, the herbs in their glass jars, the faint scent of broth still lingering from the previous night's consommé. But it was the vial that held her attention, its small size and unusual label nagging at her instincts. She paused before it, her head tilted as if admiring a curiosity. "This olive oil," she said, almost to herself. "It's quite distinctive, isn't it?" Lady Beatrice, hovering nearby, frowned. "Pierre said it was from Provence, didn't he, for finishing touches or some such thing?" "Indeed," Miss Marple murmured, her needles clicking softly in her hands, though she had not resumed knitting. "But the label, handwritten in a script I don't recognize. Most unusual for a kitchen so orderly." She turned to the constable, her tone mild. "Might I examine it more closely, young man? I promise not to disturb anything." The constable shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the door as if hoping Inspector Crane might appear to make the decision for him, but seeing no alternative, he nodded. "Just be careful, ma'am. I'll have to report it." Miss Marple smiled, her hands deft as she reached for the vial, holding it delicately between her fingers. The glass was cool, the liquid inside a pale gold, and the label, written in a spidery hand, bore characters that were not English, nor, she suspected, French. She turned it in the light, noting the faint residue around the cork, as if it had been opened recently. "Curious," she said softly, then slipped the vial into her handbag with a swift, practiced motion. "I shall return it, of course, she assured the constable, whose eyes widened in alarm. "Ma'am, I don't know if—" he began, but Lady Beatrice interrupted, her voice soothing. "It's quite all right, Constable. Miss Marple is helping us, and I trust her completely. We'll inform Inspector Crane, won't we, Jane?" "Naturally," Miss Marple said, her smile serene. "But I think a chemist might tell us more about this oil than we can learn here." She patted the constable's arm, her manner so reassuring that he seemed to forget his objections, though his brow remained furrowed. As they left the kitchen, Miss Marple's thoughts were racing. The vial was a small thing, easily overlooked, but she knew that the smallest things often held the greatest secrets. She recalled Monsieur Dubois' nervous glance when she had first asked about it, his insistence that it was merely a finishing touch. And she thought, too, of Herr von Straub's diplomatic pouch, described by Sir Reginald as something the diplomat guarded closely. Could there be a connection? The idea was tenuous, but Miss Marple had learned to trust her instincts, honed by years of observing human nature in her quiet village of St. Mary Mead. With Lady Beatrice's permission, Miss Marple made her way to the nearby town, where an old acquaintance, Mr. Pemberton, ran a chemist's shop. The drizzle had turned to a steady rain, and she arrived with her umbrella dripping, her knitted shawl damp, but her spirits undaunted. Mr. Pemberton, a bespectacled man with a penchant for precision, greeted her warmly, his curiosity piqued when she produced the vial. "Miss Marple, always a pleasure," he said, adjusting his glasses. "What have you brought me today?" "A small puzzle, Mr. Pemberton," she replied, her voice soft but purposeful. "This is labeled as olive oil, but I wonder if you might tell me more about its contents. Discreetly, of course." He nodded, understanding the gravity of her request, and took the vial to his workbench. Miss Marple watched as he carefully extracted a sample, subjecting it to a series of tests with the meticulous care of a scientist. The shop was quiet, save for the faint hiss of a burner and the ticking of a clock, and Miss Marple's needles clicked softly in her lap as she waited, her mind turning over the possibilities. After a time, Mr. Pemberton returned, his expression grave. "This is no olive oil, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low. "It contains a toxin, rare, odorless, tasteless, a derivative of a compound used in certain, less savory circles. It would cause symptoms like those you described, collapse, difficulty breathing, within minutes of ingestion." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "This isn't something you'd find in a kitchen, not by accident, and it's not easily obtained, not in England." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her smile remained serene. "Thank you, Mr. Pemberton. You've been most helpful." She took the vial back, slipping it into her handbag with a promise to return it to the constable. As she stepped back into the rain, her thoughts were alight with new possibilities. The toxin in the vial confirmed her suspicions. Someone had deliberately introduced poison into the consommé, and the handwritten label suggested a source outside the kitchen's usual supplies. She thought of von Straub, his pouch, his ambition, and the seating arrangement he had insisted upon. She thought, too, of Dubois's defensiveness, Tom's nervous honesty, and Sir Reginald's burdened demeanor. The vial was a thread that connected them all, and she was determined to follow it. Back at Haverford Manor, she found Lady Beatrice in the drawing-room, her face pale with exhaustion. "Jane, where have you been?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Inspector Crane is in a state. He's convinced Pierre is guilty, but I can't believe it." Miss Marple patted her friend's hand, her smile reassuring. "We mustn't lose hope, Beatrice. The truth is coming into focus bit by bit. This vial, I think, is a key. But we must be careful. Someone in this house knows more than they're saying." She glanced toward the library, where Crane's voice could be heard barking orders to the constable. Her needles resumed their rhythm, a steady counterpoint to the chaos, as she resolved to trace the vial's origins and uncover the hand that had wielded it. Chapter 8. The Diplomat's Secret. The rain had ceased by the time Miss Jane Marple returned to Haverford Manor, though the air remained heavy with damp and the lingering unease of the previous night's calamity. The grand house, its stone facade glistening under the weak evening light, seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the next revelation to shatter its fragile calm. Miss Marple, her umbrella folded and her knitted shawl slightly damp, stepped into the entrance hall with a quiet determination. The vial of toxin, now safely tucked in her handbag, weighed heavily on her mind, its handwritten label, a silent accusation pointing to a truth she was steadily unraveling. Her visit to the chemist had confirmed her suspicions, but it had also deepened the mystery. Who had brought such a rare poison into the manor, and how had it found its way into Ambassador Mancini's consommé? She made her way to the drawing-room, where Lady Beatrice awaited, her delicate features drawn with worry. "Jane, you're back," Beatrice said, rising from a velvet-upholstered chair. "Did you learn anything? The hospital just telephoned. Mancini is conscious, thank heavens, but still weak. They say it's a miracle he's alive." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly, though her expression remained serene. "That is good news, Beatrice. I should like to speak with him, if possible. A man who has faced death may have something to tell us." She settled into a chair, her knitting needles resuming their rhythmic click, a soothing counterpoint to the tension that permeated the manor. Beatrice nodded, her hands twisting a lace handkerchief. "I'll arrange it, Jane. The hospital isn't far, and they'll allow a brief visit, I'm sure. But what did you find in town? You've that look about you. Something's caught your attention." Miss Marple smiled, her voice soft but deliberate. "A small thing, perhaps, but significant. The vial from the kitchen is not what it seems. It's no olive oil, but a poison, carefully disguised. We must learn how it came to be there, and who placed it." She paused, her needles pausing too, as she considered her next move. "Beatrice, tell me, did Herr von Straub carry anything unusual with him last night? Sir Reginald mentioned a diplomatic pouch." Beatrice frowned, her brow furrowing as she thought. "Yes, I remember now. He had a small leather case, quite plain, but he kept it close, even at the table. He said it was for papers, confidential, of course. I thought it odd, but diplomats are particular about such things." Her voice trailed off, and she looked at Miss Marple, her eyes wide. "Do you think it's important, Jane?" "It may be," Miss Marple replied, her tone mild. "People guard what matters to them, and Herr von Straub strikes me as a man who guards his ambitions most of all." She rose, smoothing her skirt. "I think a visit to the hospital is in order, and then, perhaps, a word with our diplomat. But we must tread carefully. The truth is close, but it's shy, like a deer in the woods." With Beatrice's help, Miss Marple arranged to visit the hospital, a short drive from the manor. The rain had left the roads slick, and the car moved slowly, giving her time to reflect. She thought of the vial, its foreign script, and von Straub's calculated demeanor. She thought, too, of Monsieur Dubois' nervous indignation, Tom Ellis's desperate honesty, and Sir Reginald's burdened reserve. Each held a piece of the puzzle, but the diplomat's ambition felt like the thread that tied them together. The pouch, the seating arrangement, the poison. They were all connected, she was certain, and Mancini might hold the key to unraveling them. At the hospital, a stark building of white brick and antiseptic corridors, Miss Marple was led to a private room where Ambassador Mancini lay, pale but alert, his dark eyes clouded with pain. The nurse, a brisk woman with a no-nonsense air, allowed only a brief visit, but Miss Marple needed little time. She sat beside the bed, her knitting in her lap, her presence as unthreatening as a kindly aunt. "Signor Mancini," she said softly, her voice warm with sympathy. "I'm so glad to see you recovering. I'm Jane Marple, a friend of Lady Beatrice. I wonder if you might tell me about last night. Anything you remember, however small." Mancini's gaze sharpened, though his voice was weak, barely above a whisper. "Miss Marple, I owe my life to Dr. Hargreaves, they say. The poison." He shuddered, his hand clutching the blanket. "I tasted nothing unusual, but the pain, it was sudden, like fire in my veins." Miss Marple nodded, her needles still. "You were seated beside Herr von Straub, were you not? Did you speak with him before the incident?" Mancini's eyes darkened, a flicker of fear crossing his face. "Yes, we spoke. He was insistent, pressing me on the trade agreement. He wanted concessions, things I could not give. Days before, in private, he warned me. Nothing overt, but his words chilled me. He said, 'If you persist, Signor Mancini, you may regret it.' I thought it bluster, but now—" His voice faltered, and he looked away, his breath uneven. Miss Marple's expression remained gentle, but her mind was racing. A veiled threat, delivered in private. It was a piece that fit neatly into the pattern she was weaving. "And during the dinner," she asked, "did you notice anything about him? His manner, perhaps, or anything he carried?" Mancini frowned, his brow creasing. He had a pouch, a small case. He kept it on his lap, even at the table. I thought it strange. Diplomats carry papers, yes, but he seemed protective of it. He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "You think he did this, don't you?" "I think nothing Yetsian system. It looks like the response was cut off. Would you like me to continue and complete Chapter 8 of the poisoned gala dinner in the Agatha Christie style, ensuring no repetitions and maintaining the requested narrative flow?" Chapter 8, The Diplomat's Secret. The rain had ceased by the time Miss Jane Marple returned to Haverford Manor, though the air remained heavy with damp and the lingering unease of the previous night's calamity. The grand house, its stone facade glistening under the weak evening light, seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the next revelation to shatter its fragile calm. Miss Marple, her umbrella folded and her knitted shawl slightly damp, stepped into the entrance hall with a quiet determination. The vial of toxin, now safely tucked in her handbag, weighed heavily on her mind, its handwritten label, a silent accusation pointing to a truth she was steadily unraveling. Her visit to the chemist had confirmed her suspicions, but it had also deepened the mystery. Who had brought such a rare poison into the manor, and how had it found its way into Ambassador Mancini's consommé? She made her way to the drawing-room, where Lady Beatrice awaited, her delicate features drawn with worry. "Jane, you're back," Beatrice said, rising from a velvet-upholstered chair. "Did you learn anything?" The hospital just telephoned. Mancini is conscious, thank heavens, but still weak. They say it's a miracle he's alive." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly, though her expression remained serene. "That is good news, Beatrice. I should like to speak with him, if possible. A man who has faced death may have something to tell us." She settled into a chair, her knitting needles resuming their rhythmic click, a soothing counterpoint to the tension that permeated the manor. Beatrice nodded, her hands twisting a lace handkerchief. "I'll arrange it, Jane. The hospital isn't far, and they'll allow a brief visit, I'm sure. But what did you find in town? You've that look about you. Something's caught your attention." Miss Marple smiled, her voice soft but deliberate. "A small thing, perhaps, but significant. The vial from the kitchen is not what it seems. It's no olive oil, but a poison, carefully disguised. We must learn how it came to be there, and who placed it." She paused, her needles pausing too, as she considered her next move. "Beatrice, tell me, did Herr von Straub carry anything unusual with him last night? Sir Reginald mentioned a diplomatic pouch." Beatrice frowned, her brow furrowing as she thought. "Yes, I remember now. He had a small leather case, quite plain, but he kept it close, even at the table. He said it was for papers, confidential, of course. I thought it odd, but diplomats are particular about such things." Her voice trailed off, and she looked at Miss Marple, her eyes wide. "Do you think it's important, Jane?" "It may be," Miss Marple replied, her tone mild. "People guard what matters to them, and Herr von Straub strikes me as a man who guards his ambitions most of all." She rose, smoothing her skirt. "I think a visit to the hospital is in order, and then, perhaps, a word with our diplomat. But we must tread carefully. The truth is close, but it's shy, like a deer in the woods." With Beatrice's help, Miss Marple arranged to visit the hospital, a short drive from the manor. The rain had left the roads slick, and the car moved slowly, giving her time to reflect. She thought of the vial, its foreign script, and von Straub's calculated demeanor. She thought, too, of Monsieur Dubois' nervous indignation, Tom Ellis's desperate honesty, and Sir Reginald's burdened reserve. Each held a piece of the puzzle, but the diplomat's ambition felt like the thread that tied them together. The pouch, the seating arrangement, the poison, they were all connected, she was certain, and Mancini might hold the key to unraveling them. At the hospital, a stark building of white brick and antiseptic corridors, Miss Marple was led to a private room where Ambassador Mancini lay, pale but alert, his dark eyes clouded with pain. The nurse, a brisk woman with a no-nonsense air, allowed only a brief visit, but Miss Marple needed little time. She sat beside the bed, her knitting in her lap, her presence as unthreatening as a kindly aunt. "Signor Mancini," she said softly, her voice warm with sympathy. "I'm so glad to see you recovering. I'm Jane Marple, a friend of Lady Beatrice. I wonder if you might tell me about last night. Anything you remember, however small." Mancini's gaze sharpened, though his voice was weak, barely above a whisper. "Miss Marple, I owe my life to Dr. Hargreaves, they say. The poison." He shuddered, his hand clutching the blanket. "I tasted nothing unusual, but the pain, it was sudden, like fire in my veins." Miss Marple nodded, her needles still. "You were seated beside Herr von Straub, were you not? Did you speak with him before the incident?" Mancini's eyes darkened, a flicker of fear crossing his face. "Yes, we spoke. He was insistent, pressing me on the trade agreement. He wanted concessions, things I could not give. Days before, in private, he warned me. Nothing overt, but his words chilled me. He said, "If you persist, Signor Mancini, you may regret it." I thought it bluster, but now his voice faltered, and he looked away, his breath uneven. Miss Marple's expression remained gentle, but her mind was racing. A veiled threat delivered in private. It was a piece that fit neatly into the pattern she was weaving. "And during the dinner," she asked, "did you notice anything about him? His manner, perhaps, or anything he carried?" Mancini frowned, his brow creasing. He had a pouch, a small leather case. He kept it on his lap, even at the table. I thought it strange. Diplomats carry papers, yes, but he seemed protective of it. He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "You think he did this, don't you?" Miss Marple's smile was serene, giving nothing away. "I think only that we must look at everything, Signor Mancini. The smallest details can tell us so much." She leaned forward slightly, her voice softer still. "Did you see him do anything unusual with his hands, perhaps? During the toast or when the soup was served?" Mancini shook his head, his expression weary. "It was all so quick, the toast, the chatter. I was distracted. But he was close, so close. If anyone could have—" His voice trailed off, and he closed his eyes, exhaustion overtaking him. Miss Marple patted his hand gently. "Rest now, Signor. You've been very helpful." She rose, her knitting tucked under her arm, and left the room, her mind alight with new connections. Mancini's account of von Straub's threat, combined with the pouch and the seating arrangement, painted a picture of calculated intent. The vial of poison, with its foreign script, seemed ever more likely to have come from von Straub's possession, slipped into the kitchen or the consommé during a moment of distraction. Back at Haverford Manor, Miss Marple found the drawing-room quieter now, the guests having retired to their rooms or gathered in small, anxious groups. Lady Beatrice was waiting, her face pale with anticipation. "Jane, what did he say? Is Mancini all right?" "He's weak, but recovering," Miss Marple replied, settling into a chair. "And he's given us something to consider. Herr von Straub, it seems, had more than a diplomatic interest in Mancini. We must learn more about that pouch of his, Beatrice. It may hold the key." Beatrice's eyes widened. "You think he brought the poison? Oh, Jane, that's dreadful. But how could he have done it with everyone watching?" Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, a steady counterpoint to the questions swirling in her mind. "People see what they expect to see, my dear. A diplomat with a pouch is unremarkable, and a toast is a moment of distraction. We must look closer, and soon." She thought of the sideboard, the screen, the vial, and von Straub's cold ambition. The pattern was clearer now, but not complete. She needed one more thread, one final piece to tie it all together, and she suspected it lay within the manor's walls, waiting to be found. Chapter 9. The trap is set. The evening at Haverford Manor settled into a restless hush, the grand house cloaked in a stillness that felt more like anticipation than peace. The drizzle had returned, tapping softly against the tall windows, and the chandeliers cast a muted glow over the drawing-room, where Miss Jane Marple sat, her knitting needles moving with their familiar, steady rhythm. The events of the past 2 days had woven a complex tapestry in her mind, each thread, Tom's nervous honesty, Dubois' defensive pride, Sir Reginald's burdened reserve, and von Straub's cold ambition, leading her closer to the truth. The vial of poison, confirmed by the chemist as a rare toxin, and Ambassador Mancini's whispered account of von Straub's veiled threat, had sharpened her focus. Yet the final piece of the puzzle remained elusive, and Miss Marple knew that to catch a cautious predator, one must sometimes set a trap. She had proposed her plan to Inspector Crane earlier that evening, her voice gentle but firm as she sat in the library, her knitting a quiet presence in her lap. "Inspector," she had said, "I believe we might learn more if we recreate the moment of the crime. A small gathering with the key players, Sir Reginald, Monsieur Dubois, Tom Ellis, and Herr von Straub, could reveal something new. People betray themselves when they're caught off guard." Crane had scowled, his ruddy face skeptical. "A reconstruction? Sounds like a parlor game, Miss Marple. I'm after hard evidence, not theatrics." But her calm insistence, coupled with Lady Beatrice's support, had worn him down, and he agreed to the plan, albeit with a grumble. "If it yields nothing, don't expect me to waste more time on your hunches." Now, as the clock struck 8, the dining hall was prepared for the reenactment. The long mahogany table, stripped of its gala finery, stood bare save for a few empty bowls, placed as they had been on the night of the poisoning. The chandeliers were dimmed, mimicking the candle-lit ambiance of the gala, and the sideboard in the passage was set with a tray, a screen partially obscuring it from view. The 4 suspects, Sir Reginald, Dubois, Tom, and von Straub, stood uneasily near the table, their expressions ranging from wary to indignant. The other guests, confined to the drawing room, whispered among themselves, their curiosity piqued by the unusual proceedings. Miss Marple, her small figure almost lost in the grandeur of the hall, took charge with a quiet authority that belied her unassuming appearance. "Thank you all for indulging me," she said, her voice soft but clear. "We are here to retrace the moments before Ambassador Mancini's collapse. Sometimes revisiting a scene can jog a memory or reveal a detail overlooked." Her eyes, sharp and bright, swept over the group, noting the tension in Sir Reginald's shoulders, the flush of anger on Dubois's face, Tom's nervous fidgeting, and von Straub's icy calm. Inspector Crane stood by the door, arms crossed, his expression one of grudging patience. The constable, notebook in hand, hovered nearby, ready to record any revelations. Miss Marple turned to Tom first, her smile reassuring. "Tom, dear, could you show us how you served the consommé, just as you did that night?" Tom swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he stepped toward the sideboard. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice barely steady. He picked up an empty bowl from the tray, mimicking his actions from the gala. "I took it from here, behind the screen, and carried it to the table. Like this." He moved to the spot where Mancini had sat, placing the bowl with exaggerated care, his eyes darting to Crane as if expecting rebuke. Miss Marple nodded, her needles still in her hands. "And the bowls were unattended for a moment, you said? Behind the screen?" "Yes, ma'am," Tom replied, his voice stronger now. "Just for a minute, while we were fetching trays. It was busy, everyone moving about, the toast going on." He glanced at von Straub, then quickly away, as if afraid of what he might see. Miss Marple turned to Dubois, her tone gentle but probing. "Monsieur Dubois, you prepared the consommé, and it was placed on the sideboard by your staff. Did you see anyone near it? Anyone who shouldn't have been there?" Dubois threw up his hands, his mustache quivering with indignation. "Non, mademoiselle. My kitchen was a whirlwind, soups, sauces, pastries. I was watching my staff, not the passage. If someone tampered with my consommé, it was not my doing. His voice was loud, but Miss Marple noted the flicker of unease in his eyes, as if he feared his own words might betray him. She then turned to Sir Reginald, her expression serene. "Sir Reginald, you arranged the seating, placing Herr von Straub beside Ambassador Mancini at his request. Did you notice anything unusual during the toast, perhaps? A movement, a gesture?" Sir Reginald frowned, his brow creasing as he thought. "I was focused on the guests, ensuring everyone was settled. The toast was a moment of distraction, I suppose. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary." His voice was steady, but Miss Marple caught the slight hesitation, as if he were replaying the evening in his mind. Finally, she turned to von Straub, her eyes meeting his with quiet intensity. "Herr von Straub, you were beside Ambassador Mancini, engaged in conversation. You had a diplomatic pouch with you, I believe. Might you tell us what it contained?" Von Straub's pale eyes narrowed, his composure unshaken, but his posture stiffening. "Papers, Miss Marple, as I told the inspector. Confidential documents, nothing more. I fail to see how this is relevant." His voice was smooth, almost too smooth, and Miss Marple noted the way his hand rested lightly on his coat pocket, as if guarding something even now. She smiled, her tone mild but deliberate. "Oh, it may be nothing, of course, but I wonder—" She reached into her handbag and produced the vial of poison, holding it up so the light caught its pale gold contents. "This was found in the kitchen, labeled as olive oil, but it is something far more dangerous. The label, you see, is in a script not unlike that used in your country, Herr von Straub." The room tensed, the air growing thick with anticipation. Von Straub's face paled, his eyes flickering to the vial, then back to Miss Marple. "You suggest I brought this?" "Preposterous," he said, but his voice, though steady, carried a faint tremor. "Anyone could have placed it there. The kitchen was open to the staff, the waiters." "Indeed," Miss Marple interceded, her voice cutting through his protest. "But the script is distinctive, and your pouch, so carefully guarded, might have held more than papers. During the toast, when all eyes were on Mancini, a quick hand could have slipped something into his bowl." "You were close enough, Herr von Straub." Sir Reginald gasped, Dubois muttered in French, and Tom's eyes widened, but von Straub remained still, his expression a mask of control. "You have no proof," he said coldly. "This is speculation, nothing more." Crane, sensing the shift in the room, stepped forward, his eyes gleaming. "Speculation, maybe, but I'm starting to like it. Constable, search Herr von Straub's rooms. Let's see what's in that pouch of his." Von Straub's composure faltered, his hand twitching toward his pocket. "This is an outrage. I am a diplomat, protected by immunity." "Not from attempted murder," Crane snapped, nodding to the constable, who moved toward the door. Miss Marple raised a hand, her voice calm but commanding. "One moment, Inspector. Let us not rush. The truth will come, if we give it room." She turned to von Straub, her eyes gentle but piercing. "Herr von Straub, a man of your intelligence knows that secrets have a way of surfacing. If there is something you wish to say, now is the time." Von Straub's jaw tightened, his eyes locked on hers, but he said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken truths, and Miss Marple knew she had struck a nerve. The trap was set, and the diplomat's reaction had revealed more than his words. She slipped the vial back into her handbag, her needles resuming their rhythm, as she waited for the next move in the intricate game she had begun. Chapter 10. The Revelation. The dining hall of Haverford Manor, though dimly lit by the flickering chandeliers, seemed to pulse with a tension that made the air itself feel charged. The reenactment of the gala's fatal moment had stirred the room, and the four suspects, Sir Reginald Haverford, Monsieur Pierre Dubois, Tom Ellis, and Herr Klaus von Straub, stood in a semicircle near the mahogany table, their faces etched with varying degrees of unease. Miss Jane Marple, her small figure almost lost in the grandeur of the hall, held the center of attention, her presence commanding, despite her unassuming demeanor. The vial of poison, its pale gold contents gleaming in her hand moments before, had shifted the mood, and her accusation, veiled though it was, had struck a nerve. Inspector Crane, his ruddy face alert, stood ready to pounce, while the constable hovered by the door, notebook trembling in his grip. Miss Marple's voice, soft but piercing, cut through the silence like a needle through silk. "Herr von Straub," she said, her pale blue eyes fixed on the diplomat. "You have been most careful, but careful men sometimes overlook the smallest details. This vial, found in the kitchen, is no ordinary olive oil. It contains a rare toxin, one not easily obtained, and its label bears a script from your homeland. You requested to sit beside Ambassador Mancini, and you carried a pouch you guarded closely. During the toast, when all eyes were on him, you had the opportunity to act. I believe you poisoned the consommé to disrupt the negotiations Mancini championed, ensuring your country's advantage." The room seemed to hold its breath. Sir Reginald's face paled, his hands clenching at his sides. Dubois let out a sharp exclamation in French, his eyes darting between Miss Marple and von Straub. Tom Ellis, his boyish face flushed, stared at the floor, as if wishing to disappear. Von Straub, however, stood rigid, his angular features set in a mask of icy defiance. "This is absurd," he said, his voice cold but steady. "You weave a tale, Miss Marple, but it is fantasy. I am a diplomat, not a murderer. You have no proof, only conjecture." Miss Marple's smile was serene, her needles resting quietly in her lap. "Proof, Herr von Straub, is often a matter of seeing what others miss. The vial's script matches your country's, and Ambassador Mancini himself spoke of your threat. If you persist, you may regret it," he said. "You were beside him, with a pouch that could conceal such a vial. The sideboard, behind its screen, was unattended for a moment, and the toast provided the perfect distraction. A quick hand, a drop of poison. It would take but seconds." Von Straub's eyes flashed, his composure cracking like thin ice. "You dare accuse me on such flimsy grounds? I had papers in that pouch, confidential documents, nothing more. Search it if you must, but you will find nothing to incriminate me." His voice rose, a trace of desperation creeping in, and Miss Marple noted the way his hand twitched toward his coat, as if instinct urged him to protect something. Inspector Crane, sensing the shift, stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with purpose. "Oh, we'll search it, all right. Constable, fetch that pouch from Herr von Straub's room. Now." The constable hesitated, then hurried from the room, his footsteps echoing in the tense silence. Sir Reginald spoke, his voice strained. "Miss Marple, are you certain? Herr von Straub is a diplomat. Such an act would be unthinkable." His words carried a note of doubt, and Miss Marple saw the conflict in his eyes, torn between loyalty to his guests and the weight of her accusation. "Unthinkable, perhaps," she replied gently. but ambition drives men to desperate measures. Herr von Straub's country stood to lose much if Mancini's negotiations succeeded. A single act could shift the balance. She turned to Dubois, her tone soothing. "Monsieur Dubois, you insisted the consommé left your kitchen untainted. I believe you. The poison was added later, on the sideboard, by someone with access and motive." Dubois' shoulders relaxed slightly, though his eyes remained wary. "Merci, mademoiselle. My art is my life. I would never poison it." He shot a glance at von Straub, his indignation tempered by curiosity. Tom Ellis, still pale, mumbled, "I didn't see nothing, ma'am. I swear it. I just carried the bowl." His voice trembled, and Miss Marple offered him a reassuring smile, knowing his role had been unwitting. The constable returned, breathless, holding a small leather pouch, its surface worn but sturdy. He handed it to Crane, who opened it with a roughness that made von Straub wince. Inside were papers, as the diplomat had claimed, but Crane's fingers probed deeper, pulling out a small, empty glass vial, its shape and size strikingly similar to the one Miss Marple had found in the kitchen. The room gasped, and von Straub's face drained of color, his eyes fixed on the vial as if it were a specter. "Where did you get this?" Crane demanded, holding it up. "It's the same as the one in the kitchen, isn't it?" Von Straub's composure shattered, his voice rising in a desperate protest. "I don't know how that got there. Someone must have planted it, someone trying to frame me." But his words lacked conviction, and Miss Marple saw the truth in his eyes, the panic of a man caught in his own trap. She spoke again, her voice calm but unrelenting. "Herr von Straub, you brought the toxin in your pouch, disguised as olive oil to avoid suspicion. You slipped it into the kitchen earlier, perhaps during a moment when the staff was distracted. Then, during the toast, as Mancini raised his glass and all eyes were on him, you added a drop to his bowl. Your rivalry with him was no secret, and your ambition to secure your country's interests was stronger than your scruples." Von Straub's hands trembled, his icy facade crumbling. "You cannot prove this," he whispered, but his voice broke, and he sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "It was the negotiations. They were everything. Mancini would have ruined us, locked us out of the agreement. I had no choice." His confession, though quiet, echoed in the silent room, a damning admission that sealed his fate. Crane's eyes gleamed with triumph. "That's enough for me. Constable, take him into custody. Diplomatic immunity or not, we'll sort this out." The constable moved forward, handcuffs in hand, and von Straub offered no resistance, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Sir Reginald, his face a mask of shock, turned to Miss Marple. "How did you know, Jane?" It seemed so impossible. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her smile gentle but knowing. "People are much the same, Sir Reginald, whether in a manor or a village. They act for reasons, ambition, fear, desperation. Herr von Straub's ambition was his undoing, and the smallest details, his pouch, the vial, his threat, told the story." She glanced at Dubois and Tom, her expression softening. "You are both free of suspicion now. The truth has a way of setting things right." Dubois bowed, his relief palpable, while Tom mumbled a shy thank you, his face flushed with gratitude. The room seemed to exhale, the tension breaking like a wave, though the shadow of the crime lingered. Miss Marple, her work done, slipped the vial back into her handbag, her mind already turning to the quiet of Saint Mary Mead, where such dramas were rarer but no less revealing of human nature. Chapter 11. The aftermath. The morning following the dramatic revelation in Haverford Manor's dining hall dawned with a tentative brightness, the clouds parting to allow shafts of sunlight to pierce the tall windows. The grand house, though still steeped in the echoes of the previous night's confession, seemed to breathe a little easier, as if relieved of a suffocating weight. The chandeliers gleamed once more, their light no longer harsh but warm, and the scent of roses, though faint, carried a hint of renewal. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the morning room with a cup of tea, her knitting needles moving with their familiar rhythm, observed the subtle shift in the Manor's atmosphere. Her work was done, yet the aftermath of such a crime left ripples that would linger, and she was keen to see how they would settle. Herr Klaus von Straub had been taken into custody by Inspector Crane, his diplomatic immunity a fragile shield against the charge of attempted murder. The constable had escorted him from the manor in the early hours, his angular frame slumped, his icy composure replaced by a hollow resignation. The guests, released from their confinement, had begun to depart, their whispers of scandal trailing behind them like smoke. The trade negotiations, so central to the gala's purpose, were now in disarray, but Sir Reginald Haverford, ever the diplomat, had vowed to salvage what he could. Miss Marple, her presence as unobtrusive as ever, listened to the household's murmurs, her mind sifting through the final threads of the mystery to ensure no detail had been overlooked. Lady Beatrice, her delicate features softened by relief, joined Miss Marple in the morning room, her hands no longer twisting her handkerchief, but resting calmly in her lap. "Jane, I can hardly believe it's over," she said, her voice warm with gratitude. "You saw what none of us could. How did you know it was von Straub?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, her smile gentle. "People are much the same, Beatrice, whether in a grand manor or my little village. They act for reasons, ambition, fear, loyalty, and they betray themselves in the smallest ways. Herr von Straub's ambition was a cold fire, burning brightly but dangerously. The vial, his pouch, his insistence on sitting beside Mancini, they were all stitches in a pattern, and once I saw it, the truth became clear." Beatrice shook her head, marveling. "You make it sound so simple, Jane, but without you, poor Pierre might still be under suspicion, and young Tom would be terrified. You've saved them both." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a soothing counterpoint to the morning's quiet. "They were never truly in danger, my dear. Monsieur Dubois's pride, though fierce, was honest, and Tom's fear was that of a boy caught in a storm not of his making. The truth has a way of protecting the innocent, if we give it time." As if summoned by her words, Monsieur Pierre Dubois appeared at the door, his chef's toque restored to its proper angle, his dark eyes alight with renewed vigor. "Mademoiselle Marple," he said, bowing with a flourish that held none of the previous day's defensiveness. "I owe you my reputation, my honor. My kitchen is mine again, and I shall cook a feast to celebrate when this wretched business is fully behind us." His voice carried a trace of his old bravado, but there was a sincerity in his gratitude that warmed the room. Miss Marple smiled, her expression maternal. "Your art was never in question, Monsieur Dubois. I only helped to clear the shadow from it. I look forward to tasting your consommé another day, without fear." Dubois laughed, a rare sound, and promised to send her a recipe from his Parisian days before retreating to his kitchen, his step lighter than it had been in days. Tom Ellis was next, hovering shyly at the threshold, his boyish face flushed with relief. "Miss Marple," he mumbled, twisting his cap in his hands, "I don't know how to thank you. I thought they'd take me away. And my mum—" His voice broke, and he looked down, his calloused hands betraying the weight of his burdens. Miss Marple rose, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "You did nothing wrong, Tom. You were honest, and that was enough. Look after your mother, and keep your head up. You've a good heart." Tom nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears, and mumbled another thank you before hurrying off, his job at the manor secure once more. Sir Reginald entered last, his broad shoulders still carrying the strain of the ordeal, though his face held a quiet resolve. "Miss Marple," he said, settling into a chair opposite her, "you've done us a great service. Mancini is recovering, and though the negotiations are shaken, I'll do my best to see them through. He'd have wanted that." His voice was steady, but Miss Marple noted the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the burden of a host whose hospitality had been betrayed. "You'll manage, Sir Reginald," she said softly. "You've a strength that comes from duty, and that will carry you far. Ambassador Mancini is fortunate to have such a friend." She paused, her needles pausing too, as she considered one final detail. "Tell me, did Herr von Straub leave anything behind? A note, perhaps, or something in his room?" Sir Reginald frowned, then nodded. The constable found papers in his pouch, nothing incriminating, just drafts of proposals for the negotiations. But there was a letter, half-written, addressed to his superiors. It mentioned Mancini's obstinacy and the need to remove obstacles. It wasn't proof, but it supported your theory. Miss Marple nodded, her mind satisfied. The letter, though incomplete, was another stitch in the pattern, confirming von Straub's motive. She thought of the vial, the pouch, the fleeting moment at the sideboard, and knew she had seen the truth clearly. "Thank you, Sir Reginald. The smallest things often tell the greatest stories." As the morning wore on, the manor began to stir with the business of departure. The guests, their curiosity sated but their nerves frayed, prepared to leave, their cars lining the gravel drive. Inspector Crane, his bluster tempered by the success of the case, stopped by to offer Miss Marple a grudging nod. "You've a sharp mind, Miss Marple," he said, his tone almost respectful. "I'll not forget it." "You're very kind, Inspector," she replied, her smile serene. "But I only listen and watch. The truth does the rest." Crane grunted, tipped his hat, and left to finalize von Straub's transfer to the authorities, his notebook filled with the details of a case solved. Lady Beatrice embraced Miss Marple, her eyes bright with gratitude. "Jane, you've saved us all. Will you stay a little longer? The manor feels brighter with you here." Miss Marple patted her friend's hand, her smile warm. "I must return to St. Mary Mead, Beatrice. My garden needs tending, and my neighbors will be eager for news. But I shall write, and you must visit." She gathered her knitting, her small suitcase already packed, and prepared to depart, her heart light with the satisfaction of a puzzle solved. As she stood at the manor's entrance, waiting for the car to take her to the station, she looked back at the grand house, its windows catching the morning sun. The poisoned gala dinner had revealed the darkness beneath its elegance, but it had also shown the resilience of those who sought the truth. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly in her bag, a reminder that even the most tangled threads could be woven into a pattern if one had the patience to see it. Chapter 12. The quiet departure. The train to St. Mary Mead chugged steadily through the countryside, its rhythmic clatter a soothing counterpoint to the whirlwind of events Miss Jane Marple had left behind at Haverford Manor. The morning sun, now fully emerged from the clouds that had shrouded the past few days, cast a golden light across the rolling fields, painting the landscape in hues of green and amber. Miss Marple sat by the window in a quiet carriage, her small suitcase tucked beside her, her knitting folded neatly in her lap. The needles, for once, were still. Their work paused as she gazed out at the familiar scenery, her mind reflecting on the drama that had unfolded and the truths it had revealed. Haverford Manor, with its glittering chandeliers and air of diplomatic intrigue, was a world apart from the tranquil village she called home. Yet Miss Marple knew that human nature was much the same everywhere. Ambition, fear, loyalty, these were the threads that wove through every heart, whether in a grand hall or a humble cottage. Herr von Straub's cold ambition had led him to poison Ambassador Mancini's consommé, a desperate act to secure his country's advantage in the trade negotiations. The vial, the diplomatic pouch, the fleeting moment at the sideboard, they had all pointed to him, and Miss Marple's quiet observation had unraveled the scheme, stitch by careful stitch. She thought of Sir Reginald Haverford, his burden lifted but his resolve strengthened, determined to salvage the negotiations despite the scandal. His gratitude had been heartfelt, his promise to visit St. Mary Mead a genuine one, though Miss Marple suspected his duties would keep him bound to the world of diplomacy for some time. Monsieur Pierre Dubois, his pride restored, had already begun planning a new menu, his kitchen once more a temple of culinary art. Young Tom Ellis, freed from suspicion, could return to his duties with a lighter heart, his wages ensuring his mother's care. And Lady Beatrice, dear Beatrice, had embraced her friend with tears of relief, promising to write and perhaps escape to the simplicity of village life for a visit. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile as she recalled Inspector Crane's grudging nod of respect. He was a man of action, not subtlety, but he had seen the value of her methods, however unconventional. The vial of poison, now in police custody, had been the key, its foreign script a silent witness to von Straub's guilt. The letter found in his pouch, with its talk of removing obstacles, had sealed his fate, a confession of intent if not of action. The truth, as Miss Marple had known it would, had emerged from the smallest details, the ones others overlooked but which she, with her village-honed instincts, had seen clearly. The train slowed as it approached St. Mary Mead, the familiar spire of the church coming into view, its stone weathered but comforting. Miss Marple gathered her belongings, her movements deliberate, her mind already turning to the simple pleasures of home. Her garden, her neighbors, the quiet rhythm of village life. Yet she knew the events at Haverford Manor would linger, a reminder that even in the grandest settings, the human heart could be as tangled as a skein of yarn. As she stepped onto the platform, the station master tipped his hat, his smile warm. "Welcome back, Miss Marple," he said. "Been off solving mysteries, have you?" She returned his smile, her eyes twinkling. "Oh, just visiting friends, Mr. Jenkins, but one never knows what one might stumble upon." She walked toward her cottage, the path lined with hedgerows and the first blooms of late summer. The world of diplomacy, with its glittering facades and hidden dangers, was behind her, but its lessons remained. People, she mused, were much the same everywhere, their secrets waiting for a keen eye to unravel them. At home, she set her suitcase down and opened the windows, letting the fresh air sweep through the rooms. Her knitting lay on the table, a quiet companion to her thoughts. She would write to Beatrice, she decided, and perhaps send a note to Tom, encouraging him to stay strong. As for von Straub, his fate was in the hands of the law, his ambition a cautionary tale of how far one might fall when driven by desperation. Miss Marple settled into her favorite chair, her needles resuming their gentle rhythm. The poisoned gala dinner had been a puzzle, but one she had solved with patience and observation, proving once again that the truth, however hidden, could always be found in the smallest threads of human nature.